All right. Hello there. Welcome to like literally my first live stream. I might have tried one. I have like a vague memory of trying one way back in like 2015, but like 10 years ago seems like another lifetime. So hopefully this will work. Now, I'm hearing, so I'm going to take those headphones out. All right. So like I said, this is the first time. If there are tech glitches, I'm sorry. I apologize, but hopefully we can make this happen. And I'm here today to try to give some hope, some inspiration, but not in just a touchy-feely kind of way that, hey, just have hope, just have hope. Things might look bleak, but just have hope. No, I want to give something more concrete than that. I want to give you a strategy, a thought, maybe a shift in perspective of how I've been seeing this and what has really helped me get more hope because, it seems kind of bleak out there. So I want to talk about that for just a minute. And I don't want to linger there for too long because if you've paid attention to the news, or maybe you haven't, but if you've been paid attention to the news or whatever, what's going on here in the United States, there's some stuff happening, some pretty, for those of us who care about our freedom and care about democracy and things, there's stuff going on that is concerning, to say the least. That's a mild thing. I've heard this current time described as a polycrisis because it's not just politics here in the United States. I mean, economies are weird and crazy. There's just I've been talking to somebody that I know who lives in Indonesia and Bali, and this last month alone they've had like a political crisis there. They've had a major flood. They've had an earthquake, and they're just barely hanging on. And of course, right now there's a big crisis in Gaza, which is just it's very heartbreaking what's happening there. And almost anywhere you look, it's like it's easy to get a feeling of we are doomed. And the other day I was reading something or listening, so I don't even remember where it was, but I was there and and got this impression that this person was talking about, okay, this is it. This is our collapse. This is where we, the species, sort of wipes ourselves out. And I've heard that, and I've read books about that before. There was a book by, I think it was Peter Diamond, about how civilizations sort of collapse and destroy themselves. And I thought to myself, well, okay, that might be one possible path here. But, being somebody who cares about other people on this planet and the creatures of this planet, I really would prefer to not have us take ourselves out in some big, catastrophic way. I just, the optimist in me, the little bit that remains, is not okay with that. I'm not okay with that. I mean, I think that view, that sort of doom point of view, which I've really previously embedded myself in, like back around 2007, 2008. So I'm very familiar with it. It doesn't provide for solutions. It doesn't provide for much optimism. It doesn't provide for doing something different. It adopts this worldview that really says, hey, I'm here reacting to whatever is coming in. And whatever is coming in, I can't control. I can't fix it. I can't make it better. I am just sort of a pawn, this one small person in this sea of things happening. It is out of my control. And I understand that point of view well, but it's not a very empowering point of view. It doesn't give much hope or inspiration to think, oh, well, unless somebody comes and saves us, maybe it's the aliens, right? I mean, I've seen a lot of stuff online with people saying, maybe the aliens are going to come save us. And sure, maybe they will, but maybe we need to save ourselves first, just in case the aliens don't show up, right? So this is really about that idea of how do we start working on saving ourselves? And so I want to go one level deeper in what I think the problem is. Um, and, the problem, I think, is that we're stuck in the past. We're literally stuck in the past. If we look at the past, and again, I'm going to give sort of a US centric point of view on how I see this, because that's where I grew up. It's not to try to say that the US is more important than anywhere else, just that that's what I'm most familiar with. So from my point of view, growing up in the US, we grew up here in a system that was already established. I'm part of Generation X, so the baby boomers had already, led the way and sort of set up systems, and they were responding to a prior generation. So the prior two generations had really set up some very solid systems, like our system of science and academics and many other things, healthcare. A lot of that stuff was created post World War II. Here in the United States. So we established this this strong system of science as one part of that. And then, the baby boomers came along and were really about sort of rebelling against trying to have some individuality within these strong systems that were being established by the prior generations. So they pursued this kind of wanton individualism, like I want to gain for me personally, money, fame, fortune, whatever it is, at all costs kind of attitude. And I'm not saying that's all baby boomers, but that's certainly the vibe of that generation. Like, give me my freedom, give me my rights, give me my land, give me my whatever, whatever. And so Gen X sort of grew up in the shadow of that. And so I learned that, well, you have to kind of scrape and claw to get anything for yourself, because that's what I grew up in. And so each sort of generation is reacting to the prior generations, and often reacting against. And so we set up these patterns of reacting against, and we also set up systems. And I think here in the United States, we set up from some very solid systems that have lasted for a long time, like our scientific system was until very recently unsurpassed in the world, at least for amounts of funding and probably Nobel prizes and breakthroughs and things like that as well. And so that's what we're dealing with. That's our past. But the problem is the past no longer works when things go nonlinear. So what I mean by nonlinear, and by the way, I'm an admitted geek, so I might use words like that, and hopefully, that's okay. And if not, there are plenty of other channels to go to that maybe have less geeky things going on. But, I'm really trying to get to the bottom here. And I know maybe this is a bit long, but it's important. It's important to understand how we got here before we can understand what the solution is. How do we move forward? So in terms of the systems that we set up, they became very stultified is the word that's coming to mind. And I don't use that word often, so it could be wrong, but stultified. It just like fixed, just stuck. So I was part of academia. I was a professor doing science stuff for about 10 years in a tenured position. And it just, one of the reasons that I ended up leaving a tenured faculty job in science, and it wasn't like I was unsuccessful. I had a big lab and was working on cool projects, but I was so frustrated by the rigid thinking of the bureaucracy, but not just the bureaucracy, of so many of my colleagues and the structures. I was interdisciplinary. That means like working across different fields. I'm sure you know what interdisciplinary means, but whatever. Sorry about that. But I was very interdisciplinary, but I felt like here was one firewalled group over here, and here was another firewalled group over here, and they were each doing their own things and using their own special language for it, and rarely talked to one another. And then somebody like me comes along and tries to bridge across and get people talking to one another. And that worked to an extent, but it was very isolating and just very frustrating because that's not the way the system was set up. It was set up for people to be in departments doing their things. And I'm sure it's gotten a little bit better since then because I still work with academic people in my day job, but it's still very much like the rigid system I was familiar with that I left in 2011. Um, that's the thing. It's like it's stuck. So we have these two things. Like we feel, at least I feel, like there are these systems around us that we can't do much about that control or parameterize. They put us in a box of what we can and can't do, what is okay and what's not okay. And we have these sort of reactive things of how we grew up, our particular generation, our particular place and time, that then defines how we're reacting against things. And for many of us, that's all there is. That's my point. That's all there is. And it's that past that then defines the space of possibilities we see in the future. And given that, these systems are kind of broken now. I mean, if they weren't broken before, which I think they were somewhat broken before, now, especially here in the USA, they're becoming very broken with what's going on with our current administration. So they're broken systems. And this gives an opportunity to us. That's the thing about this time, is as much as you can look out and say, this is really disturbing, when the systems that we have start breaking down, it also gives us the opportunity to do something different, to look at something in different ways. But before we can do that, we have to really understand this idea that I term boxes of logic. So if you've been part of the personal development, any kind of personal development, you may have heard the term limiting beliefs. Now, just in case you haven't heard that before, it's really the idea that we grow up and we, through our growing up process, we learn things, we obtain beliefs that reside at the subconscious level in our heads, directing us according to these beliefs, and it's very hard for us to violate those beliefs. So you might think, for example, the belief that the earth is round. Now, I happen to have that belief that it's mostly a spheroid, I think is the technical term for that. And that is a belief. I'm not saying that's a limiting belief, but that's a belief. Now, it's just a model of the world is really what a belief is. Some statement about or thought about how the world is, how our life is, how things are. Now, something like the earth is a spheroid, there's a lot of evidence supporting that. It still doesn't absolutely prove it, but we could all be living in a simulation and it could be just a simulated thing. And we can't disprove that, at least not presently. So there are other alternative models, but that model fits the data pretty well. But there are a lot of things we carry around that aren't. So when I work with academics, there's a lot of imposter syndrome that comes up. And that has to do with some of these so-called limiting beliefs, or I will call them boxes of logic, because it implies more than just one belief. It's actually a set of beliefs, a set of logic that we've taken on ourselves together. So in imposter syndrome, it's very easy to say, they gave me lots of stuff. They gave me this recognition. They gave me this grant. They gave me this position. And I don't really feel like I'm necessarily good enough. Like I might really fail. I'm really worried that inside that I'm not good enough for this. But, on the outside, I've got to project full confidence, full, like I know exactly what I'm doing. And that it's, so that my colleagues won't think that I've got a problem here. So I'm going to project, but inside I'm really doubtful. That comes from boxes of logic about who we are, what we need to do. Often, for example, that kind of box of logic related to feeling imposter syndrome. It has to do with I am not working hard enough. I see how hard so and so works, and we look at some colleague, or I look at how many publications so and so has. And I don't want to make this just about academics because it's not. I just use those examples because I'm so familiar with it. So we look at some colleague or some friend, someone else, and say, well, they're doing so much better than I am. They seem to have it together, and I really don't. And so we compare ourselves and we have a box of logic about how we are insufficient. And we find evidence to support that box of logic. And then we just reinforce it. And so we get stuck in these boxes. And these boxes of logic are really, they profoundly shape our whole experience because so much of what we see and think is filtered through the logic that we have adopted on different subjects. And I don't want to go much more in detail here. Maybe I'll do another thing on that sometime on boxes of logic. I've talked about them and written about them a lot, but the point is there are these boxes and we get stuck in them. And they're based on the past. The boxes of logic are not based upon the future. They use our reasoning mind to sort of walk around in these boxes of logic and ruminate and think about, if you've ever just like ruminated about what's going on and felt like you're just ruminating, then that's exactly what you're doing is you're probably working within a box of logic. So that's the problem. When we're basing things on the past, we're using logic that was developed from what we encountered in the past. But when we're talking about how do we build a better future? How do we have some hope? How do we figure out a way out of this mess? Then we've got to step out of our existing boxes of logic because what we build in the future, what we create in the future that is hopefully better than what we've had in the past, than these crumbling systems that we have, it has to be new boxes of logic, new ways of operating, new ways of working. So we can't use our reasoning mind to really understand what this is. I mean, I'm not saying that we completely abandon reason. Reason has its place in there, but it's not primarily reasoning that will lead us there because reasoning is very linear and the future is very non-linear. Humanity is non-linear. We are thinking and feeling beings. And when we use reason alone, we abandon the feeling part. And that's a huge problem that has happened in large segments of our society. Like, that's how I was raised. Forget about all that touchy-feely feeling stuff. Forget about that. Forget about heart. Just forget about your subjective experience and whether that's a good experience or not, and just do what's logical. Just do what's rational. Like work hard and do this and this and this, and then you will get the prize. Well, I still don't have the prize yet. I mean, I don't and I do. I mean, I do because, I really can't complain about this life that I've had despite all of the challenges. Like, I really appreciate that. And appreciation is a very important thing to have. But at the same time, my logical mind says, I don't have the prize yet. So there's this disconnect that I'm pointing to. And the exit hatch from this conundrum, the exit hatch from being stuck in boxes of logic is our imagination. It is our imagination. Now, the imagination is not a reasoning thing. The imagination allows you to travel in time, future, past. You can travel anywhere in time in your imagination, and you can travel in space, like to any location, even if it's not a physical location here on planet Earth. In your imagination, you can travel there. Now, it's much easier when we're younger to do that. And that's because of one simple thing. It's because we have been taught to use reasoning to limit our imagination. And I'm going to say that again because it's so important. We have been taught to use reasoning to limit our imagination rather than letting our imagination flow freely. So I was just recently reading about Albert Einstein and his, he had a tremendous imagination. And that's one of the reasons he was able to fundamentally revolutionize physics with his special and general theory of relativity, because he was able to imagine. He did these thought experiments called Gedanken experiments, which literally means thought experiments in German, as far as I understand. He did these experiments about people riding on a train, a moving train, and sending signals to one another, like via sound, and like what would happen to the sound waves and how, all of that. And that's how he started understanding things like time dilation, how if you're moving faster, moving away, that you will have your time will be stretched compared to somebody who's stationary, things like that. So he did all these thought experiments. Now, the other day I was reading about this a little bit more, and I didn't realize that he would, as he was taking a nap, he would hold ball bearings in his hand, and as he started to nod off, they would drop from his hand and bounce off the floor and wake him up. And that was intentional because he wanted to be in that liminal space, that space in between dreaming and waking. He really wanted to get that space and capture those ideas that were coming through from the sort of more dreaming, full on imagination side, but still ground them here in reality. So to not be in that space for too long. And so he would, after he'd wake up, he'd immediately write down whatever he had and capture that. And that was a big part of how he made fundamental breakthroughs in the nature of our reality, is by exploring that liminal space. It's letting go of the reasoning mind. And that's one way that he did that. And so that points us to a way forward, not just for scientific discoveries, not just if you're going to be an Imagineer at one of the big studios or whatever. No, like this is something that we can all use and need to be using if we want to escape boxes of logic. Because like I said, the boxes of logic are based upon our past. We've formed them based upon our experience. Okay. So we formed these boxes of logic, and then now how do we get out of them? Well, we go form new boxes for ourselves. And imagination allows us to do that. So we don't have to accept that this is the way things always have to work. So I've been thinking about, just to give you an example, I've been thinking about the idea of transparency and how if I were to design my ideal society of the future, one of the elements of that would be transparency, like really, really deep transparency about everything. And it was actually inspired by one of the scientific clients I work with who has open lab meetings that actually are transmitted to the internet. So like when they have lab meetings and discussions, people can join in and see what's going on and even comment on what's going on. And I was like, at first I was like, really? Why would you do that? But then I realized, like, I've just been trained. I just have a box of logic that we've got to be secretive about certain things. But my opinion, and this is just my opinion, is that secrecy is a big part of so many of the problems that we are having in our society today, like backroom deals and dealing and just all sorts of stuff that goes on that is not exposed to the full light of day. And so I'm like, I think it would be better to do that. So I've started imagining, what would that be like? What would a system of full transparency for everybody, whether it's politicians, whether it's corporations, whether it's academia, what would that look like? And how would we get there? And so I got some ideas, and I'm not going to go too much into detail about that because this is not about me. I'm just giving you that as an example. But it's pretty powerful when you start doing that. And you might say, well, that's just still airy-fairy imagination. You can imagine it, but, so what? So what? And that's the important thing here. And please excuse me, I have a bit of a cold this morning. So anyway, so it's not just airy fairy because imagination is like the leading edge of reality. Like when we create an imagined picture of something and we actually start bringing that picture into our reality by writing it down, by drawing it out or sketching it out, then we're starting to make it concrete and real for ourselves. We're not just saying, oh, that was just a fantasy, a dream. When we revisit that again and again, we start elaborating that picture. It can, we fill in more details each time we revisit it, each time we think about it, when we write about it more. And so we can start filling in the picture. Now, that still doesn't make it a real thing, but that leads to us being inspired to take actions to start making that thing real. Like once we have it really written down and we're convinced, oh, this is an interesting idea, we maybe don't know how to do it yet. And this is one of the biggest mistakes so many people make is they think, oh, if I'm going to imagine some possibility, like before I can really imagine it, I have to know the how of that thing. I have to know how that's going to happen. And again, huge mistake. We have to start with the imagination, with that vision first, and really solidify that first. And then we'll start getting ideas as time goes on of the how, of how we are going to implement that. And that is such a powerful way of doing things, like starting with that picture and then allowing the how to come through time. Now, this is not a fast way of, changing things. It doesn't happen overnight. You're not going to go in and bang it out. And at the same time, it is the way that almost all great creations happen. If you look at any skyscraper in any city, that wasn't just somebody who showed up with a bunch of tools and said, okay, let's build a skyscraper here. Doesn't happen that way. Someone started by imagining the design in their minds. An architect, a planner of some kind, and an architect imagined this is the building that I want to build here. So they started with imagination and then moved from the imagination into the practicalities and then into the details and then into actually making it happen. Everything starts with imagination. This computer system I'm here on started with somebody imagining, well, many people imagining many different aspects of this digital thing. So when we start living more from imagination, I'm not saying all the time, but blending, doing enough time, spending enough time in imagination, then we can start developing this picture of a different reality for ourselves. We can start envisioning something better. And now is the time to do that. Like if you see what's going on and you're not happy with it, like I'm not, now is the best time to do it. 10 years ago, not as good, because when you have a picture that contradicts, when you imagine something that might be pretty different than the system that you're currently in, and that system is really like solid and rooted and grounded, then it's pretty hard for you to create change. I mean, you can, but it takes a lot of persistence and patience knocking your head up against this system, and you may only make it so far. But now, as systems are they're shaky, like the academic system is kind of shaky right now. I'm not saying it's going to go away, but I think it's going to go through some changes. And so if we understand that now is a time of change and we bring in this active imagination, we can really start shaping that change. We can be a future shaper instead of a reactor to the past. And this is how I encourage finding some hope. Now, I want to say a few words before I start wrapping up here and seeing if you have any questions. So, why don't we use this imagination more often? My theory is, I don't have proof for this, but my theory is the more education that we have, the less that we use imagination, especially in that area that we're educated in. So what I mean by that is, like, if I'm educated in physics, the more education I get in physics, the less likely I am to have an active imagination that I apply to my work in physics. And there was actually a book about how conservative people are in their area of work, how they become more conservative. I'm not talking about political conservative. I'm just talking about conservative, not willing or able to dream. That's because when we get highly trained in one specialty, in one area, whatever that is, we learn. Part of specialization is learning what everybody else knows, learning about the past. And the more we learn about the past and get stuck in that past knowledge, the past paradigms, the past boxes of logic, the harder it is to step outside and imagine something new. This totally explains why Einstein, as an outsider to physics, was able to revolutionize physics in ways that insiders weren't able to. They were stuck in their boxes of logic. Einstein wasn't. He hadn't learned it. I've heard all these theories that, you know, or statements that, oh, the best scientists, they make their big breakthroughs when they're younger in their careers, and then when they're older, they don't have imagination anymore. I think that's utter BS. I think the only age factor here is that as we get older, we do learn more, and we can get even more stuck in our boxes of logic. But this is not inevitable. This is not some aging thing where suddenly your brain stops being able to imagine. It's just the fact that you've accepted those boxes of logic that you were trained in your specialty. You're stuck there now. You're allowing yourself to be stuck there, and you're limiting your imagination. And so that's really the point that I was making, is why don't we use our imagination? Because we prioritize reasoning, again, to such an extent in so many areas of our society, not just academics, although academics is guilty for sure of this, but in so many other areas, especially for any kind of professional. We prioritize, like, reasoning, think through it, be reasonable, have a plan, have all of the details together. And when we put that reasoning front and center, when we start trying to even imagine a little bit, that part of us, that reasoning part, stands up and says, hey, no, you can't do that. That's impossible. That will never happen. There are all these reasons why it won't happen. Now, the funny thing is, this is a conversation in your own head. And I've had this very conversation many times where it's like, I'm thinking about some idea, and then it's like the critic immediately comes in and starts critiquing, nope, won't happen, impossible. But why don't we gain some control over the critic? Why don't we say, critic, you're okay, but right now, step aside. I need you at certain times in my life when I'm about to make a big decision, for example, but I don't need you right now while I'm trying to imagine a better future, better possibilities. So it's really important to understand we all have this capacity. Imagination is one of our fundamental faculties that we have as a human being. I've been teaching a course called Core Intelligence, and I actually teach about 4 faculties. They are the reasoning, the feeling, the imagination, and the intuition. And so, again, here we're just focused on the imagination part of that. And it is, as I've delved into that for teaching this class, it's just the more I see, it's like, why aren't we using this more? Because what happens is many of us use it by default. When we think about the future, we just project from the past into that future, and we are actually imagining, we're using imagination, but we're using an imagination that is based upon the past, rooted in the past, rather than saying, let's forget about the past for a second. Let's just imagine and free ourselves to, like, what if the past were different? Then what would I imagine for a future? And it can be really powerful to unroot yourself from that rigid boxes of logic that are there. So in terms of how to get started, we're going to actually do a little exercise here in a minute, if I can actually figure out how to invite someone else in. But before we go into an exercise, if you want to stay around to do a little exercise on this and get going on it, I want to say a few things, because I know some people, especially in the recording, might drop off once we start doing an exercise. So if you're interested in these kind of topics, please go ahead and like, or even better, subscribe, because we'll be doing more of these lives in the future. And share it with a friend if this is the kind of content that's interesting to you. I would love it. And what else did I have to say? Oh, yeah. So the exercise that we're about to do, if you want a printed version of that, you can send either a direct message or just pop in the chat like that you ask for the PDF, and we'll send you the PDF. It's not quite ready, but it will be there very soon. So we'll send you that PDF so that you can walk through this exercise on your own and spend a bit more time with it in the future, to really start unlocking your imagination and getting into that space so that you can really start looking at what could we create that's better than what we've had, not just trying to repair the sort of breaking down systems, because there's a certain point, like where, like an old house that's just falling apart, you have to just tear it down and start over, or maybe you take pieces of it and build on that. So I think this is really the time to start thinking about that. And that can apply not only to the systems overall, but to your personal life, to your career as well. And I'm happy to talk about, and we'll talk about more of that kind of stuff in the future. There was one more thing, and because I'm kind of sick today, I can't even remember what the other thing was. So why don't we, without further ado, invite Elise in to see if she can do an exercise for us, with us, about doing this active imagination exercise, unlocking it a bit. So let's see if I can bring her in. All right, I can see you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can.
All right, there's a little bit of echo.
Yeah, I think you have to turn off your speaker. That's what I learned.
Oh. Okay, how's that?
It's good.
Okay. So, thank you guys. That was really awesome, Morgan. Thank you very much for walking us through all of that. And yeah, I think I wanted to come in here and bring a little exercise to you guys, because there's nothing like trying it out for yourself and seeing how it feels to really decide if this is something you agree with or not. I mean, your own data is better than everybody else's. So first, I'm going to just walk you through a real brief exercise, and I'm going to give you a few questions to consider, and then we'll take a few minutes of just taking some time, a little bit of silence time, to try it out. So if you can do this in your head, but if you have a pen and something to write down on, you might want to reserve these for the future, so that in the future you can develop that imagination further. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a couple questions, and just go with it and give it a try, and also think about how you're feeling as you're going through the exercise. Like, what does it shift anything in your body or in feeling, in addition to your mind? And then after that, we'll if anybody wants to share, you can go ahead and add anything in the chat. So first of all, let's take a moment to get present in the moment. So maybe if you're sitting, feel your feet on the floor, butt on the seat. If you're driving, I don't know if anybody's driving. Hands on the wheel, hopefully. Keep the hands on the wheel. And just take a moment to kind of like center yourself here, so that we can be present and thinking about this as we go. Okay. Then here is the first question. So, if you think of one thing in your life that feels stuck right now, so just take a moment to think about anything that comes to mind. Could be big, could be small, could be personal, could be worldwide, could be something with another person or a colleague, a work situation, anything that just really feels like you kind of been working on this for a while and it feels stuck. And then when you have that in your mind, just consider this question. I'm going to give you this question and then a couple of minutes to consider it, and then we'll do a second question. The first question really is, okay, if you have that thing that feels stuck, if everything went as well as possible, what would success look like? What would it feel like to be unstuck? What would it look like, feel like? What would you see or hear? How would you know if you are, if you have transcended that? So just take a minute to think about what would that feel like or look like if I was not stuck? And don't worry about how now, as Morgan said, don't worry about how we're going to get there. We're just imagining a future that looks different from today. It might seem impossible or it might seem possible. It doesn't matter. It's what would you want to be? What would you want to be celebrating 1 year from now with respect to that issue, or 1 month from now? What does that feel like? And I'm going to give you just a couple minutes. I don't know if we have the ability to play any background music. If we do, we could put some on now. And just a couple minutes to kind of think about that. You can close your eyes if you want, as long as you're not driving. Just kind of imagine, like, are there some pictures that come to mind in your mind? Let's see what comes up. I'm going to give you a minute here. This minute of silence. And if you aren't sure what you think about it, if you aren't sure what success looks like for you or a greater future looks like, just imagine what you don't want and then try to flip that around. Well, I don't want this to happen. What's the opposite of that? That's another way to kind of tap in here. Okay. And you can continue on with that question, or you can move on to the next question. I'm going to give this one to you, and then just another minute to think it through. Is when you have that picture in your mind, one thing you can do is continue focusing on that picture. As Morgan said, continue focusing it on the future. And I encourage you to do that because that will solidify that. But if you have a clear picture, then the next question to consider is really, what's one or two things I might do between here and there? How might I get there? What comes up? What's a project maybe? What's a little step I could take today? Or what's a big and bold step that might happen between here and that future? Just kind of brainstorm a couple ideas of what's between here and there. And again, if you don't have a clear picture of the future, this might not bring anything up now. But even if you have kind of an imagined future, I think, oh, something comes up. So I'm just going to give another moment of silence here a little bit and just think about what might come up. What might something I could do between here and there. I'm going to give you guys a minute just to think about that. All right. I hope that was helpful. Hope you guys came up with at least something. And this is something you can repeat anytime. It's a very short exercise. It's just 2 questions. The first one is, imagine if everything went well, what would that look like? And the second one is just, what maybe is a small or a big thing that I could do between here and there? And, you know, come up with something one day, don't come up with something another day. Just keep working on that imagined future, and you will be able to really put some detail around it and be able to work on that. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to pass it back to you, Morgan.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, hopefully you can hear me now. So thank you, Elise. That I really appreciate you guiding a little exercise there. So let's wrap this up and just recap a couple important points. It seems bleak right now, but I really think there is hope. This is how I find hope, is by tuning into that imagination of something better, of better things for society at large, culture, humanity, and better things for myself personally. And then through solidifying those, finding ways to start actually making them happen. It's not easy and fast, but it does give you that hope. It gives you that optimism. And it can be really powerful to do it. And the second point is that to really enable yourself to do it, you have to be willing to get out of your reasoning head, out of your boxes of logic. So important to let the reasoning go. And you can even try something like what Einstein did, which is hold ball bearings in your hand as you're taking a nap and let them bounce on the floor. And as you come back to the waking world, you know, write down any ideas that you got. There are so many strategies like that, and I'll talk about more in the future. So really, please use this imagination for yourself and share this with other people around you to dream, imagine a better future for ourselves. It's powerful and it's awesome. And if you want an enhanced version of the exercise Elise gave you with several more things, please just drop in the chat that you would like that. You could just say exercise or PDF, we'll know what you mean. And we'll be happy to send that via private message to you. It'll be a couple days, but we'll get that to you. And just also like or subscribe here, and you can also see it when it's available there. All right. Thanks for attending and spending your time. I know your time is precious. I really love that you were here, and I have enjoyed spending this time with you and also spending time with Elise. Thank you, Elise, for being here. And thank you for the team behind the scenes as well that has helped make this happen. People like Gabriel. So thanks, everyone. I'll see you next time.